The midnight freight to Chicago carved through Kansas wheat fields like a blade through silk, its whistle crying lonesome across the prairie. Inside car number 7, between stacks of grain sacks and rusted farm equipment, 17-year-old Maya Rodriguez pressed her back against the cold metal wall. One hand clutched to her swollen belly, the other gripping a torn envelope that held everything she owned in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train lurched violently as it rounded Devil's Curve, throwing her sideways into the darkness. Through the gap in the sliding door, stars wheeled overhead like scattered diamonds, indifferent to the terror that lived in her chest. She had been riding for 3 days, surviving on stale bread and rainwater. Caught in her cupped palms, but the cramping in her abdomen told her something was wrong. Something was changing. The door slammed open with a violence that shattered the night silence. Well, what do we have here? 3 men stood silhouetted against the moonlight, their faces hidden in shadow, but their intentions clear in the way they blocked her only escape. The leader stepped forward, boots clanging against the metal floor, and Maya caught the glint of a railroad company badge on his coat. "Freight Inspector Johnson," he said, voice oily with false authority. "And you, little girl, are trespassing on company property." Maya struggled to her feet, her enlarged belly making every movement awkward and painful. "Please, I just need to get to the next town. I'll get off, I promise." The second man laughed, a sound like gravel in a coffee can. "She's in trouble, boys. Look at that belly. Some man's leavings, I'd say." "Shut up, Carl," Johnson snapped, but his eyes never left Maya's face. "Question is, what's she worth to us? Railroad don't pay bounties for stowaways, but maybe someone else might." The third man, younger than the others, shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Johnson. She's just a kid." "Kid with a problem," Johnson replied. "And problems cost money to solve, unless ... He stepped closer, and Maya smelled whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Unless she's willing to work off her debt." Maya's hand moved instinctively to the small knife hidden in her boot, the only thing her mother had given her besides disappointment and shame. "Stay away from me." Johnson's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Or what? You'll tell your daddy? Your husband?" He gestured at her swollen stomach. "Don't see a ring, sweetheart. Don't see anyone here to protect you." The train began to slow as it approached a water stop, and Maya felt her last chance slipping away like sand through her fingers. Through the open door, she could see lights in the distance, a small town sleeping beneath the stars. Freedom! If she could reach it. "Please," she whispered, hating the way her voice broke. "I have money. Not much, but money." Johnson snatched the envelope from her hands, ripping it open to count the few crumpled bills inside. $12. That won't even cover the fine for trespassing. He pocketed the money with theatrical disappointment. "Guess you'll have to find another way to pay." The young man stepped forward. "Johnson, this ain't right. She's pregnant, for God's sake." "That's her problem, Tommy. Should have thought about that before she spread her legs for some traveling man." Maya's vision blurred with tears and rage. This was how it always ended, wasn't it? Men taking what they wanted, leaving her with nothing but shame and consequences. Just like her stepfather, who'd put his hands where they didn't belong until she'd run screaming into the night. Just like Danny Martinez, who'd whispered promises in the barn loft until she'd believed them, until he disappeared the moment her belly began to show. "You want to know the truth?" she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "The father was a coward who ran the moment he heard. My family threw me out like garbage. I've got nowhere to go and no one to help me. So do what you want, but know that you're no better than any of them." Johnson's face darkened. "Little bitch has some mouth on her." He grabbed her wrist, fingers digging deep enough to bruise. "Time to teach you some manners." Maya yanked the knife from her. boot in one fluid motion, the blade catching moonlight as she slashed across his reaching hand. Johnson screamed and stumbled backward, blood streaming between his fingers. "You cut me, you crazy little, get away from me." Maya backed toward the open door, knife trembling in her grip. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, and below, the railroad ties blurred past in the darkness. "Grab her!" Johnson shouted, clutching his wounded hand to his chest. "Don't let her get away." Carl lunged forward, hands grasping for her arms. Maya twisted away, but her swollen belly threw off her balance. She stumbled, feet tangling in the loose rope that secured the grain sacks. The knife flew from her grasp, clattering across the metal floor. "Got you now," Carl panted, fingers closing around her wrist. Maya looked into his face, saw the hunger there, the casual cruelty that would destroy what little was left of her. She thought of the baby growing inside her, innocent of the circumstances that had created it. She thought of her mother's cold eyes when she'd begged for help, of Danny's promises that had turned to ash, of all the ways the world had taught her that girls like her didn't matter. She made her choice. Maya threw herself backward through the open door, Carl's shocked grip slipping from her wrist as she tumbled into the night. For a moment she was weightless, suspended between the train and the earth below, between the life she was fleeing and whatever waited in the darkness. Then gravity claimed her. She hit the gravel embankment hard, the impact driving the breath from her lungs as she rolled down the steep slope. Rocks tore at her clothes, cut her hands and face, but somehow she kept rolling, momentum carrying her away from the train's iron wheels. Behind her, she heard Johnson shouting curses that were swallowed by the locomotive's whistle. Maya came to rest in a drainage ditch filled with muddy water and cattail reeds. Every part of her body screamed in protest, but she was alive. More importantly, the baby was still moving, still fighting inside her. The train's lights disappeared around a bend, taking her tormentors with it. In the sudden silence, Maya heard the sound of her own ragged breathing, the distant hoot of an owl, and something else. Something that made her heart skip with hope. A church bell, tolling midnight in the town ahead. She struggled to her feet, legs shaking like a newborn colt's. Her dress was torn and muddy, her hands scraped raw, but she was free. The lights of the town beckoned through the darkness, promising sanctuary, or at least a place to rest before the sun rose. Maya began to walk. The town of Millbrook revealed itself slowly as she limped along the railroad tracks. First came the grain elevator, tall and proud against the star-scattered sky. Then the water tower with its faded company logo, the depot with its promise of civilization and safety. Gas lamps flickered along Main Street, casting warm circles of light that seemed to welcome weary travelers, but Maya knew better than to trust in welcomes. She'd learned that lesson the hard way in 3 towns already, when shopkeepers had chased her from their doorsteps and church ladies had whispered behind their gloved hands about fallen women and moral decay. Still, she had nowhere else to go. Depot sat at the end of the platform like a patient guardian, its windows glowing soft yellow in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the glass, Maya could see a figure moving inside, someone working late or early, depending on your perspective on time. She approached slowly, each step deliberate despite her exhaustion. Her reflection in the depot window stopped her. Cold, wild hair tangled with burrs and blood, dress torn to reveal too much skin, belly round and obvious beneath the fabric. She looked exactly like what she was, a girl who'd run out of choices. Maya raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What would she say? How could she explain without inviting the same judgment that had followed her across 3 states? But the baby chose that moment to kick hard against her ribs, reminding her that she wasn't making this decision alone anymore. She knocked. The movement inside ceased. Footsteps approached the door, measured and unhurried. A key turned in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a man in his early 40s, tall and lean with graying hair and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore a depot master's uniform, brass buttons polished to perfection despite the late hour. "Miss?" His voice was gentle, concerned. "Are you hurt?" Maya opened her mouth to speak, but only a sob came out. The adrenaline that had carried her this far suddenly deserted her, leaving her swaying on her feet like a tree in a strong wind. The station master stepped forward, catching her elbow as her knees buckled. "Easy there. Let's get you inside before you fall down." He guided her into the depot's warmth, settling her onto a wooden bench near the stove. The heat felt like heaven against her chilled skin, and for a moment, Maya simply sat there, absorbing the first kindness she'd experienced in weeks. "My name's Samuel Harrison," the man said, moving to the coffee pot that steamed on a side table. "I'm the depot master here in Millbrook. What's your name?" Maya stared at her muddy hands. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to invent a story. That would make her seem less desperate, less damaged. But something in Samuel Harrison's voice, the absence of judgment, the simple human concern, made her want to tell the truth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Maya Rodriguez," she whispered. "I was on the freight train, but these men ... they tried to ... She gestured helplessly at her torn dress, her scraped hands. Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "You jumped?" Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "From a moving train." It wasn't a question. Samuel handed her a steaming cup of coffee, the ceramic warm and solid in her shaking hands. That took courage. "It took desperation," Maya corrected. Samuel studied her face, taking in the bruises, the exhaustion, the fear that still lingered in her dark eyes. His gaze dropped briefly to her swollen belly, then returned to her face without comment. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question was so practical, so focused on immediate need rather than moral judgment, that Maya felt tears threaten again. "Yesterday morning, maybe the day before, I'm not sure." Samuel disappeared into a back room, returning with a sandwich wrapped in brown paper and a jar of milk. "Wife made extra for my shift," he said, though Maya suspected this was a lie. "Can't let good food go to waste." Maya devoured the sandwich, thick slices of ham and cheese between fresh bread, while Samuel returned to his desk, shuffling papers and updating logbooks as if runaway pregnant girls appeared in his depot every night. His deliberate normality was more comforting than any words could have been. "The next eastbound passenger train comes through at 8:15, Samuel said without looking up. "If you're looking to go back where you came from." "I'm not," Maya said quickly. "I can't." Samuel nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Westbound leaves at noon, goes all the way to Denver." Maya touched her empty pocket where her money had been. "I don't have fare. That's a problem," Samuel agreed mildly. He glanced up from his paperwork, meeting her eyes. "Course, there's always work that needs doing around a depot. Filing, cleaning, helping passengers with their luggage. It doesn't pay much, but it includes meals and a place to sleep." Maya stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice," Samuel corrected. "You can catch that westbound train and keep running. Hope you find something better down the line. Or you can stay here. Work for your keep until..." He gestured carefully at her belly. "Until your situation changes." "You don't know anything about me," Maya said, suspicion creeping into her voice. "I could be running from the law. I could be a thief." Samuel leaned back in his chair, considering this. "Could be," he agreed. "But thieves don't usually throw themselves from moving trains to escape railroad men. And criminals don't usually look at me like they expect to be kicked back into the night." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not married," she said bluntly. "The baby's father is gone. People will talk." People always talk, Samuel said. Question is whether you care more about their words or your own future. Outside, the church bell chimed 1 o'clock. Dawn was still hours away, but Maya felt something shifting inside her chest, some knot of despair beginning to loosen. Here was a man offering her exactly what she'd been searching for, not rescue, not charity, but honest work and basic dignity. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desktop. When he spoke, his voice was soft, distant. Had a daughter once. It would have been about your age now. He cleared his throat. Returning to the present. Some folks get dealt a hard hand, Miss Rodriguez. Doesn't mean they don't deserve a chance to play it well. Maya felt the last of her defenses crumble. This stranger had looked at her, really looked, and seen not a fallen woman or a cautionary tale, but a human being worthy of kindness. It was more than her own family had given her. I work hard, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I can clean, I can cook, I'm good with numbers. I won't cause trouble, I won't steal, I won't, Miss Rodriguez. Samuel's voice cut through her desperate promises. You jumped from a moving train to protect yourself and your child. I'm not worried about your character. The simple faith in his words broke something open inside Maya's chest. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build something better from the ashes of her old life. I'd like to stay, she whispered. Samuel nodded once, decisive. Then welcome to Millbrook. He stood, moving to a filing cabinet in the corner. There's a small room upstairs, used to be for railroad personnel passing through. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. We'll get you settled there for tonight. Start fresh in the morning. As Samuel led her up a narrow staircase to a simple room with a bed, washstand, and window overlooking the railroad tracks, Maya felt the weight of the last few months beginning to lift from her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about her past and her future. But tonight, for the first time since she'd fled her stepfather's house, she would sleep in safety. Outside, the midnight freight continued its journey toward Chicago, carrying with it the men who had tried to destroy her. But Maya Rodriguez was no longer running. She had found her sanctuary in the most unlikely place, a small depot in a forgotten Kansas town, watched over by a man who understood that sometimes salvation came not through grand gestures, but through this simple act of offering someone a place to stay. As she settled onto the narrow bed, Maya placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of life within. We made it, she whispered to her unborn child. We're going to be okay. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Maya believed her own words. Dawn broke over Millbrook like spilled honey, golden light seeping through the depot window, to wake Maya from the deepest sleep she'd known in months. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, the absence of fear too unfamiliar. Then memory returned. The train, the jump, Samuel Harrison's weathered face offering her sanctuary when the rest of the world had turned its back. She sat up carefully, her body protesting with aches from yesterday's ordeal. Through the window, she watched the town stirring to life. A milk wagon rattled down Main Street, the driver calling greetings to early risers. A woman in a blue dress swept her front porch, pausing to wave at a neighbor. Children's laughter drifted from somewhere beyond the grain elevator, bright and careless as birdsong. It looked like any other small town, peaceful and ordinary. But Maya had learned not to trust appearances. Peaceful towns could harbor cruel hearts, and ordinary people could become monsters when faced with something that challenged their comfortable certainties. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Rodriguez, you awake in there? Samuel's voice carried none of yesterday's urgency, just the steady calm that had made her trust him in the first place. Yes, sir, I'm awake. Breakfast is ready when you are. No rush. Maya heard his footsteps retreat down the stairs, and she marveled again at his restraint. He hadn't demanded explanations, hadn't interrogated her about her past or her plans. He'd simply offered help, and then stepped back, giving her space to breathe. She washed her face in the basin Samuel had filled with fresh water, then attempted to repair the damage to her appearance. Her dress was beyond salvation, torn and stained beyond any hope of respectability, but she did what she could with her hair, braiding it back severely to hide the worst of the tangles. The smell of bacon and coffee drew her downstairs, where she found Samuel setting plates on a small table near the depot's front window. He'd changed from his uniform into work clothes, denim trousers and a cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves. Somehow this made him seem more approachable, less like an authority figure and more like a regular man choosing to be kind. "Hope you're hungry," he said, not looking up from his task. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house sends over extra whenever she's got it. Claims I'm too thin, though I've been telling her for years that I'm exactly the right size for my bones." Maya detected the faint smile in his voice and felt some of her tension ease. "Mrs. Patterson? Runs the boarding house on Elm Street. Good woman, though she's got opinions about everything from politics to pie crusts." Samuel poured coffee into 2 cups, the steam rising between them like incense. "She want to meet you eventually, see what all the fuss is about." "Fuss?" Maya's stomach clenched. "People are already talking?" Samuel's expression grew serious. "Train conductor stopped by this morning. Saw 3 railroad men reported an incident involving a stowaway. They're claiming a crazy woman attacked them with a knife, then jumped from the train like some kind of lunatic." Maya's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective and afraid. "What did you tell him?" "Told him I'd been here all night, and hadn't seen hide nor hair of any crazy women. Suggested maybe they'd been sampling too much of whatever they kept in their flask." Samuel's eyes met hers across the table. "Course, if such a woman had appeared, bleeding and desperate, I'd have been obligated to help her, Christian duty and all that." The careful way he phrased it told Maya everything she needed to know. Samuel Harrison was willing to protect her, but he wasn't naive about the challenges they might face. "They'll be back," Maya said quietly. "Men like that don't give up easily." "Maybe. But Millbrook's not their territory, and I've been a depot master here for 15 years. Folks tend to listen when I vouch for someone." Samuel buttered a biscuit with deliberate care. "Question is, are you planning to give me reason to regret that trust?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, I'm not." They ate in comfortable silence, watching through the window as Millbrook continued its morning routine. Maya found herself cataloging details, the way the hardware store owner arranged his display, the path the school children took on their way to lessons, the rhythm of life in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. "It's beautiful," she said without thinking. Samuel followed her gaze. "Millbrook's a good town. Not perfect, we've got our share of gossips and troublemakers, but most folks here believe in giving people a fair chance." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your situation. It won't shock them as much as you might think. This is a farming country. We understand that life doesn't always follow the schedule we'd prefer." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You mean other girls have gotten themselves into trouble?" "I mean other people have faced difficult circumstances and found ways to build good lives despite them." Samuel's voice carried gentle correction. "Having a baby isn't trouble, Miss Rodriguez. It's life. Complicated, sometimes inconvenient, but not shameful." The simple acceptance in his words made Maya's throat tight. She'd grown so accustomed to seeing herself through the lens of other people's disappointment that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be viewed as fully human. "What happens now?" she asked. Samuel glanced at the depot clock. "First passenger train arrives in 2 hours. You'll help me with whatever needs doing, checking tickets, handling luggage, keeping the waiting area tidy. Nothing too strenuous, but enough to earn your keep." His expression grew thoughtful. Might want to think about what name you'd prefer to use. Maya Rodriguez is perfectly fine. But if you're looking to start fresh ... double quotes Maya considered this. She'd been running from her name as much as her circumstances, trying to escape the weight of other people's expectations and judgments. But sitting here in Samuel's depot, eating breakfast like a normal person with a future worth planning, she realized she didn't want to hide anymore. Maya Rodriguez, she said firmly. It's my name. I'm not ashamed of it. Samuel nodded approvingly. Good. World's got enough people pretending to be someone else. The morning passed in a blur of new experiences. Maya learned to operate the ticket window, selling passage to farmers heading to the county seat and businessmen traveling to Topeka. She swept the platform, organized the lost and found box, and helped an elderly woman with her trunk full of quilts. Each interaction was a small test of her courage. Some passengers barely glanced at her, focused on their own travels and concerns. Others studied her with curiosity, taking in her youth and obvious pregnancy. But none were cruel. None whispered behind their hands or made her feel unwelcome. You're unnatural at this, Samuel observed during a brief lull between trains. Good with people, efficient with the paperwork. Most girls your age would be bored silly by depot work. Maya sorted through a stack of freight manifests, double-checking the destinations against Samuel's neat handwriting. Most girls my age have families to support them, futures already planned out. I can't afford to be bored by honest work. The pragmatism in her voice seemed to impress Samuel. What did you do before? Back home, I mean. Maya hesitated. She'd avoided thinking about her life before the train, before Danny Martinez's promises turned to ash, before her stepfather's wandering. Hands forced her to flee in the night. But Samuel had earned the right to some truth. Helped my mother with her sewing business. She took in mending for the ladies in town, made dresses for special occasions. I was good with the delicate work, beading, embroidery, that sort of thing. Maya's fingers moved automatically, as if remembering the feel of silk thread and tiny pearls. She always said I had an eye for beauty. What happened? The question was gentle, but Maya felt its weight nonetheless. My father died when I was 12, pneumonia. Mother remarried quickly. She needed someone to help with the farm, someone to take care of us. Maya's voice grew flat, distant. Robert wasn't a bad man, exactly. Just weak. And when he drank, he forgot I wasn't his wife. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I tried to tell Mother, but she didn't want to hear it. Easier to believe I was lying than to face the truth about the man she'd married. Maya stared out the window, watching a red-winged blackbird perch on the telegraph wire. Then I met Danny at a church social. He was handsome, charming, said all the right things. Made me feel special, like I mattered. But he ran when things got complicated. The moment I told him about the baby, he started making excuses. Had to visit his sick aunt in Colorado, needed to help his brother with the harvest. Always some reason he couldn't stay, couldn't marry me like he'd promised. Maya's laugh was bitter as the winter wind. Mother finally had her excuse to throw me out. Said I brought shame on the family name, corrupted her household with my sin. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. How old was this Danny? 23. Maya met his eyes, seeing the anger there. Old enough to know better. Old enough to be held accountable, Samuel corrected grimly. What's his full name? Maya blinked, surprised by the steel in his voice. Why? Because a man who takes advantage of a girl your age, makes promises he doesn't intend to keep, then abandons her when she needs him most, that man deserves consequences. The protective fury in Samuel's tone made something warm unfurl in Maya's chest. No one had ever been angry on her behalf before, never suggested that Danny bore responsibility for the situation they'd created together. Daniel Martinez, she said quietly. But he's long gone by now. Probably convinced himself he was the victim in all this. Men like that usually do. Samuel's expression remained grim. Doesn't make it true. A freight train's whistle interrupted their conversation, and they turned their attention back to work. But something had shifted between them, some barrier crossed. Samuel no longer looked at her as a stranger in need of temporary help, but as someone worth defending, worth caring about. The afternoon brought new challenges. A traveling salesman questioned Maya's presence behind the ticket counter, suggesting it was improper for a woman in her condition to be working in such a public capacity. Samuel's response was polite but firm, reminding the man that depot policies were none of his concern. Later, Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house arrived with fresh bread and an obvious desire to satisfy her curiosity about the girl everyone was whispering about. She was a plump woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pinned in a severe bun, the kind of person who gathered information like others collected stamps. "So you're the young lady Samuel's taken under his wing," she said, studying Maya with frank assessment. "Pretty thing, aren't you? Though you look like you could use some fattening up." Maya felt herself bristling at the woman's tone, but Samuel intervened smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson, I'd like you to meet Maya Rodriguez, my new assistant." Maya, Mrs. Peterson runs the finest boarding house in 3 counties. The introduction was masterful, establishing Maya's position as an employee rather than charity case, giving her status and purpose beyond her circumstances. Mrs. Peterson's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more respectful if no less curious. "Assistant, you say? Well, I suppose the depot's been busy enough to warrant help. All those freight shipments for the Henderson farm, and the cattle cars coming through for the market." "Maya's been invaluable," Samuel confirmed. "Best assistant I've had in years." The praise made Maya stand a little straighter, proud of work honestly done and recognition honestly earned. But Mrs. Peterson wasn't finished with her assessment. "And where are you from, dear? What brings you to our little town?" Maya felt the familiar flutter of panic, the urge to lie or deflect. But Samuel's steady presence at her side gave her courage to face the question directly. "I came from east of here, ma'am. Looking for a fresh start and honest work." She placed her hand on her belly, making her condition impossible to ignore. "Mr. Harrison was kind enough to give me both." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened slightly at Maya's directness, but her expression wasn't unkind. "I see. Well, fresh starts are what this country was built on, I suppose. And Lord knows Samuel could use the help around here." The woman departed with promises to send over more bread and a casserole for their dinner, leaving Maya feeling as though she'd passed some crucial test. "That went well," Samuel observed. "Mrs. Peterson's opinion carries weight in this town. If she approves of you, others will follow." Maya wasn't entirely convinced. She seemed friendly enough, but I could see the questions in her eyes. "She knows I'm not married." "Course she does. Everyone will know within a day or two. There's no hiding your condition, and this is a small town." Samuel began closing up the depot for the evening, pulling down window shades and banking the fire in the stove. But knowing and caring are different things. Most folks here have enough troubles of their own without borrowing yours. As evening settled over Millbrook, Maya helped Samuel with the final tasks of the day. She was learning his routines, anticipating his needs, finding her place in the rhythm of depot life. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose beyond mere survival. "Tomorrow's Sunday," Samuel mentioned as they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms. "Train schedule's lighter, just the evening passenger service. Gives us time to catch up on paperwork, maintenance tasks." He paused at his door, looking thoughtful. "Might be a good day for you to rest, get your strength back." Maya shook her head. "I'd rather keep working, if that's all right. I don't want people thinking I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Samuel's smile was warm with approval. "Fair enough. But Maya, you don't have to prove yourself every minute of every day." Sometimes accepting kindness is just as important as earning it. Alone in her small room, Maya prepared for bed with a heart lighter than it had been in months. Through her window, she could see lights beginning to twinkle in houses throughout Millbrook, families gathering for dinner, children being tucked into bed, the simple domestic rhythms that had seemed impossibly distant from her own life. But now, for the first time, she could imagine herself as part of such a scene. Not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who belonged, someone who had earned her place through honest work and genuine connection. The baby stirred within her, a gentle reminder of the future they were building together. Maya placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of tiny limbs and the promise of new life. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, just as she had the night before. But this time, the words carried more weight, more conviction. Samuel Harrison had given her more than just a job and a place to sleep. He'd given her hope, and the chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. Outside, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying its own cargo of dreams and destinations toward the western horizon. But Maya no longer felt the urge to follow that sound toward unknown promises. She had found what she was looking for right here, in a small depot where a good man had looked at her with kindness instead of judgment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve and her growing place in this community. But tonight she would sleep peacefully, surrounded by the evidence of her own capability and worth. 3 weeks passed in Millbrook, like pages turning in a book Maya had never dared to read. Each morning brought the same ritual, the whistle of the 6:47 freight train pulling her from sleep, the smell of coffee drifting up from Samuel's kitchen below, the gradual awakening of a town that had somehow begun to feel like home. Maya's hands had grown steady on the ticket punch, her penmanship neat in the ledger books that tracked arrivals and departures. The depot passengers had stopped staring quite so openly at her expanding waistline, accepting her presence as naturally as they accepted the painted schedule board that announced arrivals and departures. But acceptance, Maya was learning, came in layers like sediment in a riverbed. Some settled quickly, while others took time to accumulate into something solid enough to trust. "Package for Mrs. Eleanor Whitman," announced the postal clerk, sliding a brown paper parcel across the depot counter. "Came in on the morning freight from Kansas City." Maya examined the address label, written in spidery handwriting that spoke of arthritic fingers and fading eyesight. "I'll make sure she gets it. Mrs. Whitman usually comes in on the afternoon passenger service." The postal clerk, a nervous young man named Timothy, who blushed whenever Maya spoke to him, gathered his remaining packages with unnecessary haste. "Much obliged, Miss Rodriguez." "You tell Mr. Harrison I said hello." As Timothy hurried out, Maya noticed the way he avoided meeting her eyes directly, as if her pregnancy might be contagious through prolonged visual contact. She'd grown accustomed to such reactions, the careful politeness that masked discomfort, the way conversations shifted when she entered a room. Still, Millbrook's residents treated her with more courtesy than she'd expected. Perhaps it was Samuel's influence, or perhaps small prairie towns simply had more pressing concerns than the moral failings of teenage girls. Either way, Maya was grateful for the breathing room their indifference provided. "Busy morning?" Samuel emerged from the freight office, carrying a clipboard thick with manifests and shipping orders. His shirt sleeves were rolled up despite the October chill, and a smudge of ink marked his left temple where he'd absently rubbed it while calculating tonnage weights. "The usual," Maya replied, organizing the day's passenger tickets into neat stacks, though Mr. Henderson stopped by with questions about shipping his wheat harvest. "Seems to think the railroad is conspiring to bankrupt him with their freight charges." Samuel chuckled, a sound Maya had grown to treasure for its easy warmth. "Jeremiah Henderson thinks everyone's conspiring against him, from the railroad to the Almighty himself." Last month he accused the Postal Service of deliberately delaying his seed catalogs to sabotage his planting schedule. Is he wrong about the freight charges? Maya had noticed the tension in Henderson's voice, the way his weathered hands trembled. Slightly as he counted out coins for shipping fees, Samuel's expression grew more serious. Not entirely. Railroad companies know farmers don't have alternatives for moving their crops to market. Some take advantage of that dependency. He paused, studying the manifest on his clipboard. But Henderson's biggest problem isn't the railroad. It's the drought. 3rd year of poor rainfall, and his fields are producing half what they should. Maya filed this information away, another piece in her growing understanding of Millbrook's complex social geography. Every passenger who passed through the depot carried stories, financial struggles, family disputes, dreams deferred or abandoned entirely. She was beginning to see how her own troubles fit into the larger tapestry of human difficulty. Speaking of struggles, Samuel continued, his tone carefully neutral. Dr. Morrison stopped by yesterday while you were at the post office. Asked how you were feeling, whether you'd given any thought to medical care. Maya's hand stilled on the ticket stacks. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually, but hoping to postpone it indefinitely. I feel fine. The baby's moving regularly, no unusual pain or bleeding. That's good to hear. But Dr. Morrison's delivered most of the babies in this county for the past 20 years. He knows what to watch for, what complications to expect. Samuel's voice remained gentle, but Maya detected the steel beneath it. This isn't negotiable, Maya. You need proper medical care. The familiar flutter of panic rose in Maya's chest. Doctors meant questions, records, forms that required information she'd rather not provide. They meant confronting the reality of her situation in ways she'd been carefully avoiding. I don't have money for doctor bills, she said quietly. Already discussed that with Dr. Morrison. He's willing to work out payment arrangements, especially considering your employment here. Samuel moved to the window, watching a farmer's wagon navigate the rutted street outside. He's a good man. Maya, discreet. He's not going to judge you or report your business to anyone who doesn't need to know. Maya wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own as she always had. But the baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick to her ribs, reminding her that her decisions affected more than just herself. When? She asked. This afternoon, if you're willing. Train schedule's light, and I can handle things here alone for an hour or two. Maya nodded reluctantly, then returned to her work with increased determination. If she was going to face Dr. Morrison's examination and inevitable questions, she wanted to feel useful and competent beforehand, grounded in her growing identity. As Samuel's capable assistant rather than simply another unwed mother in need of charity. The afternoon appointment arrived too quickly. Dr. Morrison's office occupied the ground floor of a tidy white house on Maple Street, its waiting room furnished with mismatched chairs and outdated magazines. Maya sat rigidly upright, hands folded over her belly, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Miss Rodriguez? A woman in her 50s appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pinned in a practical bun and her manner briskly efficient. I'm Mrs. Morrison, the doctor's wife and assistant. He's ready for you now. Dr. Morrison proved to be a compact man with kind eyes and gentle hands, the sort of physician who inspired trust through competence rather than charm. He conducted his examination with professional thoroughness, asking questions about Maya's health history, the baby's movements, her energy levels and appetite. Everything appears normal, he announced, helping Maya sit up on the examination table. Baby's positioned well, heartbeat strong and regular. I'd estimate you're about 6 months along, which puts your delivery sometime in late January or early February. Maya absorbed this information with mixed emotions. January seemed impossibly far away and terrifyingly close simultaneously. Any questions or concerns? Dr. Morrison asked, washing his hands in the corner basin. Will it hurt? The question escaped before Maya could stop it, betraying her youth and inexperience more clearly than any confession. Dr. Morrison's expression softened. Labor is difficult work. That's why they call it labor. But women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most do just fine. When the time comes, Mrs. Morrison and I will be there to help you through it. And after? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. What happens after the baby's born? The doctor studied her face carefully. That depends on what you want to happen. Some girls in your situation choose to give their babies to families who can't have children of their own. Others decide to raise the child themselves, with help from family or community support. Maya had tried not to think beyond the birth, as if focusing on the present moment could somehow suspend the future indefinitely. But Dr. Morrison's matter-of-fact presentation of her options forced her to confront decisions she'd been avoiding. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what I want. You don't have to decide today, Dr. Morrison said gently. You've got time to think, to see how you feel as the baby grows. Sometimes the answer becomes clearer as the situation develops. Walking back to the depot through Millbrook's quiet streets, Maya felt simultaneously relieved and overwhelmed. The baby was healthy, she was healthy, but the future remained a vast uncertainty that no amount of medical knowledge could resolve. How did it go? Samuel asked when she returned, his concern evident despite his casual tone. Fine, everything's normal. Maya hung her coat on the peg behind the counter, grateful to be back in the familiar environment of tickets and timetables. Dr. Morrison says the baby should arrive in late January. Samuel nodded, making a mental note. We'll need to start thinking about arrangements for when you're not able to work. Maybe talk to Mrs. Peterson about helping out during your recovery. The casual way he spoke of planning for her absence, as if her continued presence in Millbrook was simply assumed, made Maya's throat tight with emotion. Samuel Harrison had somehow become the first adult in her life to plan for her future, rather than simply react to her latest crisis. You don't have to do all this, she said quietly. I know I'm more trouble than I'm worth. Samuel turned from the filing cabinet where he'd been organizing freight receipts, his expression serious. Maya, you've increased this depot's efficiency by 30% since you started working here. You handle difficult passengers with more grace than I do. Your penmanship is better than mine, and you catch accounting errors I would have missed entirely. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. You're not in trouble, you're an asset. The word asset hit Maya like a revelation. She'd spent so many months thinking of herself as a burden, a problem to be solved or disposed of, that she'd forgotten she possessed actual value beyond her circumstances. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me as more than just my mistakes. Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. Maya, getting pregnant at 17 isn't a mistake, it's a consequence. Mistakes can be corrected or undone. Consequences have to be lived with, worked through, turned into something better than they started out being. That evening, as Maya prepared for bed in her small room above the depot, she reflected on Samuel's words. Through her window, she could see lights glowing in houses throughout Millbrook, families gathered around dinner tables, children being read bedtime stories, the ordinary miracles of domestic life that had once seemed impossibly distant from her own experience. But now, for the first time, she could envision herself participating in such scenes rather than simply observing them. Not as an outsider grateful for scraps of kindness, but as someone who belonged, someone whose presence added value rather than merely creating obligations. The baby stirred within her, and Maya placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of tiny limbs and the promise of new life. In a few months, there would be someone else to consider, someone whose needs would take precedence over her own fears and uncertainties. We're going to figure this out, she whispered to her unborn child. I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way to build something good. The next morning brought unexpected challenges in the form of Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, Millbrook's self-appointed moral guardian and president of the Ladies' Temperance Society. She arrived at the depot in a rustling black dress that seemed designed to intimidate, her steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so severe it appeared to stretch her facial features toward her ears. "Mr. Harrison," she announced without preamble, "I need to speak with you about the impropriety of your current staffing arrangements." Maya, who had been sorting mail behind the counter, felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. She'd known this confrontation would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time to establish herself in the community before facing it. Samuel looked up from his ledger with the expression of a man accustomed to Mrs. Thornton's dramatic pronouncements. "Good morning, Adelaide. What can I do for you?" "It's what you're already doing that concerns me." Mrs. Thornton's gaze swept over Maya with obvious disapproval. "Employing an unwed mother in such a public position sends entirely the wrong message to our young people. What kind of example does it set when we reward moral failure with respectable employment?" Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Samuel's response was immediate and firm. "Maya Rodriguez is the most competent assistant I've had in 15 years of running this depot. Her personal circumstances are irrelevant to her job performance." "Irrelevant?" Mrs. Thornton's voice rose an octave. "Her condition is visible to every passenger who buys a ticket, every child who accompanies their parents to the depot. We cannot simply ignore the moral implications of Adelaide." Samuel's voice cut through her speech like a blade through silk. "Maya's employment is depot business, not community business. If you have concerns about train schedules or shipping rates, I'm happy to address them. Otherwise, I suggest you direct your moral supervision toward matters that actually fall under your authority." Mrs. Thornton's face flushed red, but she wasn't finished. "And what happens when this girl's bastard child is born? Will you provide daycare services as well? Turn our depot into a nursery for illegitimate. That's enough." Samuel stood, his full height making Mrs. Thornton step backward. Involuntarily. "You will not use that language in my depot about any child, born or unborn. Maya is here because she works hard and does her job well. End of discussion." Mrs. Thornton gathered her skirts with wounded dignity. "The Ladies' Temperance Society will be discussing this matter at our next meeting. Don't assume this issue is settled, Mr. Harrison." After she left, the depot felt unnaturally quiet. Maya stared down at the mail she'd been sorting, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I never wanted to cause problems for you." Samuel returned to his seat, but his expression remained troubled. "Adelaide Thornton's been causing problems in this town since before you were born. Don't take responsibility for her behavior. But she's not wrong about the example I set. Young girls will see me and think, they'll see a young woman working hard to support herself and her child. They'll see someone who didn't let difficult circumstances destroy her future." Samuel's voice grew firm again. "That's not a bad example, Maya. That's exactly the kind of strength we should want our daughters to have." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the noon passenger train, bringing with it a busload of travelers and the welcome distraction of immediate tasks. But Maya couldn't shake Mrs. Thornton's words, the casual cruelty with which she'd spoken of Maya's unborn child. For the first time since arriving in Millbrook, Maya found herself questioning whether she truly belonged here, whether her presence was fair to Samuel or to the community that had tentatively accepted her. The sanctuary she'd begun to trust suddenly felt fragile, dependent on the goodwill of people who might withdraw their support as easily as they'd offered it. That night, as she prepared for bed, Maya made a decision. She would prove Mrs. Thornton wrong through her actions, demonstrate that unmarried mothers could be assets to their communities rather than moral burdens. She would work harder, be more helpful, show everyone in Millbrook that Samuel Harrison's faith in her had been justified. But even as she made these resolutions, Maya couldn't entirely silence the voice in her head that whispered Mrs. Thornton's cruel words: bastard child, moral failure, impropriety. Some wounds, she realized, were deeper than external acceptance could heal. The baby stirred within her, and Maya placed her protective hand over her belly once again. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever judgments she would face, she would not let her child grow up believing they were unwanted or shameful. You matter, she whispered fiercely. No matter what anyone says, you matter. Outside, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying its cargo toward distant destinations. But Maya no longer felt the urge to follow that sound toward unknown promises, despite Mrs. Thornton's threats and the fragility of her current situation. Millbrook had become more than just a refuge. It had become home. And she would fight to protect that home, for herself and for the child who would soon share it with her. November arrived in Millbrook with the suddenness of a door slamming shut, bringing with it bitter winds that rattled the depot windows, and the first dusting of snow that would soon blanket the prairie in white silence. Maya pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she worked, her belly now prominent enough that passengers automatically offered her their seats and shopkeepers insisted on carrying her packages. The kindness should have been comforting, but instead it reminded her daily that time was running short. Dr. Morrison's estimated delivery date loomed larger with each passing week, and Maya still hadn't resolved the question that haunted her quiet moments. What would happen to her and the baby after birth? Samuel had said nothing more about her future plans, but Maya caught him watching her sometimes with a thoughtful expression that suggested he was wrestling with questions of his own. They had fallen into an easy domestic rhythm, sharing meals, discussing the day's business, reading by lamplight in the depot's cozy main room. But beneath the surface comfort, unspoken tension simmered like water about to boil. "Package delivery for Maya Rodriguez," announced Jake Sullivan, the young man who handled local deliveries for Henderson's General Store. He set a small wrapped parcel on the counter with obvious curiosity. "Came in on the morning freight from Topeka." Maya stared at the package as if it were a coiled snake. The careful handwriting on the brown paper made her stomach lurch with recognition, her mother's penmanship, as neat and controlled as everything else about Elena Rodriguez. "Thank you, Jake," she managed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. After Jake left, Maya sat staring at the package for nearly an hour, afraid to open it but unable to put it aside. Samuel noticed her distraction when he returned from the freight office, his gaze moving from her pale face to the unopened parcel. "Bad news?" he asked gently. "I don't know yet." Maya turned the package over in her hands, feeling its modest weight. "It's from my mother." Samuel poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that perpetually simmered on the depot stove, setting one within Maya's reach. "First contact since you left." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd written to her mother once, shortly after arriving in Millbrook, sending a brief letter to let her know she was safe and well. The response had been months in coming, and Maya had begun to hope it never would. "Want some privacy?" Samuel offered. "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "I mean, if you don't mind staying. I might need." She trailed off, unsure what she might need, but certain she didn't want to face whatever was in the package alone. With careful fingers, Maya untied the string and peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with roses and vines, her grandmother's jewelry box, the one Maya had admired as a child but never been allowed to touch. Nestled inside were a few pieces of modest jewelry, her grandmother's wedding ring, a silver locket that had belonged to her great-aunt, a pair of pearl earrings her father had given her mother for their anniversary. Beneath the jewelry lay a folded letter, the paper cream-colored and expensive. Maya recognized it as her mother's best stationery, reserved for important correspondence. "My dear Maya, I pray this letter finds you in good health and spirits. I have thought of you every day since your departure, wondering if you are safe, if you have found people who will treat you with kindness. I am sending you a few things that belong to your grandmother and great-aunt. They always said these pieces should go to the next generation, and despite everything that has passed between us, you are still my daughter, and these are rightfully yours. I have news that I felt you should know. Robert left 2 weeks after you did. He packed his belongings and departed without explanation, leaving only a note saying he needed to start fresh somewhere new. I have not heard from him since, nor do I expect to. I know now that I failed you when you needed me most. I chose to believe what was convenient rather than what was true, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life. A mother's first duty is to protect her children, and I protected my own comfort instead of your safety. I do not expect forgiveness. I have not earned it. But I want you to know that if you ever need help, if you ever want to come home, you will be welcome here. Your room remains exactly as you left it. The church ladies ask about you sometimes. I tell them you are visiting distant relatives, helping with their household. It seems kinder than the truth, which is that I drove away the best thing in my life because I was too weak to face an ugly reality. Be well, my daughter. Make a good life for yourself and your child. You deserve happiness, even if I was too blind to help you find it. With all my love and deepest regrets. Mother Maya read the letter twice, then a third time, her emotions cycling through surprise, anger, and something that might have been grief. Samuel waited patiently, refilling her coffee cup when it grew cold, adding logs to the stove when the fire burned low. She says she's sorry, Maya said finally, her voice hollow. Says Robert left town, that I can come home if I want to. How does that make you feel? Maya laughed, a sound without humor. Confused, angry, relieved maybe? She touched the pearl earrings with one finger, remembering how elegant her mother had looked wearing them to Sunday services. She knew Samuel. Deep down, she knew what Robert was doing to me, but she chose not to see it because acknowledging it would have meant losing her security. And now? Now she's alone and full of regrets, and maybe that's supposed to make everything better. Maya folded the letter carefully, creasing the expensive paper with sharp precision. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give me back the months I spent believing I was worthless, that everything was my fault. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching the steam rise from his coffee cup. My wife used to say that forgiveness wasn't about pretending wrong things never happened. It was about deciding not to let those wrong things poison your future. Maya looked up sharply. In all the weeks she'd known Samuel, he'd never mentioned having a wife. She'd assumed he was a bachelor, a man who'd devoted his life to railroad schedules and community service. You were married? She asked softly. Samuel's smile was sad but not bitter. For 18 years. Catherine was her name, Katie to her friends. Prettiest girl in 3 counties, and somehow she agreed to marry a railroad with more sense than prospects. What happened to her? Influenza, 3 years ago. Started as a cough, turned into something worse before we knew to be worried. Samuel's hands wrapped around his coffee cup as if seeking warmth. She was gone within a week. Maya felt tears sting her eyes, understanding now the source of Samuel's gentle competence with emotional crises. I'm sorry, that must have been terrible. It was, still is some days. Samuel met her gaze directly. But Katie taught me that love doesn't end just because life gets complicated. She would have liked you, Maya, would have insisted on teaching. You'd knit baby clothes and arguing with Mrs. Thornton about moral superiority. The image of an unknown woman defending her made Maya's throat tight. Were you planning to have children? Samuel's expression grew distant. We tried for years. Katie lost 3 babies before they could be born, and we eventually accepted that it wasn't meant to be. He paused, then added quietly, she always said that when children needed us, They'd find their way to us somehow. The implication hung between them like incense, sweet and heavy with possibility. Maya felt something shift in her understanding of Samuel's kindness, recognizing it now not as charitable obligation, but as something deeper, more personal. "Is that what you think I am?" she asked. "A child who found her way to you?" "I think," Samuel said carefully, "that you're a young woman with more strength and dignity than most people twice your age. And I think any child lucky enough to have you as a mother is going to grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally." Maya stared down at her mother's jewelry, the tangible evidence of a family heritage she'd thought lost forever. But sitting in Samuel's depot, surrounded by the quiet evidence of his own losses and the careful way he'd built a new life from grief, she realized that family wasn't just about blood connections or shared history. "I want to keep the baby," she said suddenly, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I know it won't be easy. I know people will talk, but I want to raise my child myself." Samuel nodded as if he'd been expecting this decision. "Then we'll figure out how to make that work. Unless you're planning to leave Millbrook when the baby's born." Samuel's tone was carefully neutral, but Maya caught the underlying tension in his voice. "Your job here will be waiting when you're ready to return to it, if that's what you want." Maya felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "You'd really want me to stay? Even with a baby?" "Maya," Samuel's voice was firm, certain. "I've been alone in this depot for 3 years, managing fine but not particularly happy about it. You've made this place feel alive again, made the work meaningful in ways I'd forgotten were possible." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking you to stay out of charity or obligation. I'm asking because I've gotten used to having you here, and I'd miss you terribly if you left." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way that made Maya's heart race. She'd grown to care for Samuel Harrison, to depend on his steady presence and unwavering support. But she'd assumed those feelings were one-sided, born from her desperation and gratitude rather than genuine mutual affection. "I'd miss you too," she whispered. Before Samuel could respond, the depot door burst open with a violence that shattered the intimate atmosphere. 3 men entered in a rush of cold air and hostile energy, their faces hard with purpose and poorly concealed alcohol. Maya recognized the leader immediately. Inspector Johnson from the freight train, his hand still bearing the scar from her knife. Well, Johnson said, his voice oily with satisfaction. "Look what we found hiding in this godforsaken depot." Samuel stood slowly, his body positioning itself between Maya and the intruders. "Gentlemen, this is private property. State your business or move along." "Our business," Johnson said, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket, "is with the little wildcat who cut me up and cost me a month's wages." He waved the paper with theatrical flourish. "Got a warrant here for her arrest. Assault with a deadly weapon, destruction of railroad property, theft of services." Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd known this moment might come, but she'd allowed herself to hope that Johnson and his companions had forgotten about her, moved on to easier prey. "Let me see that warrant," Samuel demanded. Extending his hand with authority that surprised Maya, Johnson hesitated, then handed over the paper with obvious reluctance. Samuel examined it carefully, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. "This isn't a legal warrant," he said finally. "It's a complaint form filled out in your handwriting, not signed by any judge or legal authority." He handed the paper back with contempt. "You've got no more authority here than any other drunk with a grudge." Johnson's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Don't matter what papers say. That little bitch owes me for this hand, and I mean to collect." "You'll collect nothing in my depot," Samuel replied firmly. "Maya Rodriguez is under my protection, And you gentlemen need to leave before I contact the real sheriff about your intimidation tactics." Carl, the man who'd grabbed Maya on the train, stepped forward with menacing intent. "Protection, is it? What do they call it when old men take up with pregnant whores?" The word hung in the air like poison, and Maya felt her last reserves of courage crumble. She'd heard worse language before, but somehow Carl's casual cruelty cut deeper than Mrs. Thornton's moral outrage. Samuel's response was swift and decisive. He reached beneath the counter and produced a shotgun, the barrel gleaming dully in the depot's lamplight. "I said you need to leave," he repeated, his voice deadly calm. "I won't say it again." Johnson raised his hands in mock surrender, but his expression remained ugly with frustrated malice. "This ain't over, depot man. Girl's got debts to pay, and we'll be back to collect them." "No," Maya said suddenly, finding her voice despite her terror. "You won't." She stood slowly, her hand resting protectively on her belly, and faced the three men with as much dignity as she could manage. "I'm not the same girl who jumped from your train," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have work here, people who care about me, a future worth protecting. You want to keep chasing me across Kansas, making threats and waving fake warrants? Go ahead, but know that you're not dealing with a desperate runaway anymore." Johnson's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "You think this backwater station master can protect you forever? You think these farm people give a damn about some Mexican girl's bastard baby?" "I think," Maya replied steadily, "that decent people understand the difference between justice and revenge. And I think you're about to find out which category you fall into." For a moment, the depot was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant whistle of an approaching freight train. Then Johnson spat on the depot floor and jerked his head toward his companions. "Come on, we'll settle this another way." After they left, Maya collapsed onto the bench behind the counter, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The confrontation had taken every ounce of courage she possessed, and now she felt hollowed out. Fragile as glass. Samuel set the shotgun aside and knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Standing up to them like that took more courage than I've seen in most grown men." "I was terrified," Maya admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling scared. It's about doing what needs doing despite the fear." Maya looked into Samuel's face, seeing there the respect and admiration she'd never thought to earn from anyone. In that moment, she realized that her mother's letter, Johnson's threats, even her own uncertain future seemed less important than the simple fact that she'd found someone who believed in her strength. "What happens now?" she asked. Samuel helped her to her feet, his touch careful and protective. "Now we prepare for whatever comes next, together." Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing Millbrook in white silence. But inside the depot, warmed by the stove and the growing certainty of their partnership, Maya felt stronger than she had in months. The baby stirred within her, and she placed her hand on her belly with new determination. Whatever Johnson and his men were planning, whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Samuel beside her and her own hard-won courage as armor. She was no longer running. She was ready to fight. December descended on Millbrook like a predator stalking its prey, bringing with it bitter cold that froze the depot windows and made the railroad tracks gleam like silver ribbons across the snow-covered prairie. Maya's pregnancy had entered its final phase, her movements now careful and deliberate, as she navigated the increasingly cramped space behind the ticket counter. But it wasn't the approaching birth that kept her awake at night, listening to the wind howl around the depot's eaves. It was the knowledge that Johnson and his men were still out there, waiting for their moment to strike. Samuel had installed new locks on the depot doors and kept the shotgun within easy reach, but Maya could see the tension in his shoulders. The way his eyes scanned each group of passengers for familiar hostile faces The threat had changed the rhythm of their days. Where once they'd worked with easy companionship, now their interactions carried an undercurrent of vigilance. Samuel rarely left Maya alone in the depot, arranging his schedule so that he was always within earshot when passengers arrived or departed. "Train from Topeka's running 2 hours late," announced Bobby Martinez, the young telegraph operator, who brought daily updates from the regional dispatch office. He stamped snow from his boots and accepted the cup of hot coffee Maya offered with grateful hands. Storms playing havoc with the eastern routes. Maya noticed the way Bobby's eyes avoided her enlarged figure, the careful politeness that masked his discomfort with her obvious pregnancy. She'd grown accustomed to such reactions, but they still stung with their reminder that she remained an outsider in many people's minds. "Any other messages?" Samuel asked, reviewing the day's shipping manifests. Bobby hesitated, then pulled a folded telegram from his coat pocket. "This came in this morning. Marked urgent, but it's addressed to you personal-like, not depot business." Samuel took the telegram with obvious reluctance, his expression darkening as he read the brief message. Maya watched his jaw tighten, saw the muscle twitch in his temple. That meant he was struggling to control his temper. "Bad news?" she asked after Bobby left. Samuel handed her the telegram without comment. The message was brief and unsigned. "Girls. Got nowhere to run this time. Payment due with interest. Soon." Maya felt ice settle in her stomach. "They're coming back." "Seems that way." Samuel moved to the window, scanning the snow-covered street with practiced eyes. "Question is when, and how many? Maybe I should leave," Maya said quietly. "Go somewhere else, start over again. I won't let them hurt you because of me." Samuel turned from the window, his expression fierce with determination. "Maya Rodriguez, if you think I'm going to let you run off into a snowstorm, 8 months pregnant, just to avoid a fight with some railroad thugs, you've seriously underestimated my character." "But Samuel," his voice cut through her protest like steel through silk, "we've built something here, you and I, a life, a partnership, maybe even a family. I'm not giving that up without a fight." The word family hung between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Maya felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in Samuel's voice and the realization that someone was finally willing to fight for her rather than simply tolerating her presence. "What do we do?" she asked. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through options and contingencies. "First, we contact Sheriff Williams in the county seat. Get some official law enforcement involved. Make sure there's a record of their threats." "Will he help?" "I mean, given my situation. Tom Williams is a good man who believes in justice regardless of people's personal circumstances." Samuel's tone was confident, but Maya caught the slight hesitation that suggested he wasn't entirely certain of the sheriff's support. Besides, threatening a railroad employee is a federal crime. That gives us leverage. The afternoon brought no sign of Johnson and his men, but Maya felt their presence like a gathering storm. Every passenger who entered the depot made her jump. Every unexpected sound sent her heart racing. Samuel noticed her nervousness and suggested she rest upstairs, but Maya refused to hide like a frightened child. "If they're coming for me, I want to see them coming," she said firmly. As evening approached, Mrs. Peterson arrived with a covered pot that smelled of beef stew and fresh bread. Her usually cheerful demeanor was subdued, and she kept glancing toward the depot's windows as if expecting to see threats materializing from the darkness. "Heard there might be trouble coming," she said without preamble, setting the pot on Samuel's desk. "Thought you two might need some sustenance." "News travels fast in a small town," Samuel observed dryly. Bobby Martinez told his mother about that telegram, and she told her sister, and Mrs. Peterson shrugged helplessly. "You know how it is. Half the town's probably heard by now." Maya felt fresh anxiety spike through her chest. "What are people saying?" Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. They're saying that anyone who threatens one of our own had better be prepared for consequences. This is Millbrook, dear. We take care of each other here. The simple declaration of belonging made Maya's throat tight with emotion. Somehow, without realizing it, she'd become part of this community's fabric, someone worth protecting rather than merely tolerating. That's assuming they believe I belong here, Maya said quietly. Honey, Mrs. Peterson said firmly, you've been working in this depot for months, helping folks with their travel needs, handling difficult passengers with more grace than most. Far as we're concerned, you're as much a part of Millbrook as anyone born here. After Mrs. Peterson left, Maya and Samuel shared the stew in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. The depot felt smaller somehow, more vulnerable, despite the new locks and loaded shotgun. Samuel, Maya said suddenly, tell me about Catherine. What was she like? Samuel's spoon paused halfway to his mouth, surprise flickering across his features. Why do you want to know? Because she was important to you, and I want to understand who you were before I came along. Maya met his eyes directly. And because if something happens tonight, I want to know more about the man who's willing to risk everything for me. Samuel set down his spoon, his expression growing distant with memory. Katie was ... sunshine. That's the only way I can describe her. She found joy in everything. A perfectly risen loaf of bread, the first crocus blooming in spring, the sound of rain on the depot roof. His smile was soft with remembrance. She would have been fussing over you constantly, knitting baby clothes, and arguing with Dr. Morrison about your diet. How did you meet her? She was a school teacher, came to Millbrook fresh from college in the East. I was just a junior clerk then, barely making enough to support myself, let alone a wife. Samuel chuckled softly. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her to the harvest dance. And she said yes? She said yes, then proceeded to step on my feet for the entire first song. Claimed later it was because she was nervous, but I think she just wanted to see if I'd run away at the first sign of trouble. Maya smiled, picturing a younger Samuel courting a spirited schoolteacher. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she would have loved you, Maya. Would have seen your strength right away. The way you refused to let circumstances define you. Samuel's expression grew serious. Katie always said that family wasn't about blood or law, but about choosing to love someone no matter what challenges life brought. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, their hoofbeats muffled by snow but growing steadily louder. Samuel moved immediately to the window, his body tense with alertness. How many? Maya asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. 5 riders. They're stopping at the hitching post. Samuel moved to the gun cabinet, checking the shotgun's load with practiced efficiency. Maya, I want you to go upstairs and lock the door. Don't come down no matter what you hear. Absolutely not. Maya stood with difficulty, her hand resting protectively on her belly. We face this together, or not at all. Before Samuel could argue, the depot door burst open with violent force, the new lock splintering under the impact of a heavy boot. Johnson entered first, flanked by Carl and 3 other men Maya didn't recognize. All were armed, their faces hard with liquor and malicious intent. Evening, depot man, Johnson said, his voice mockingly polite. Sorry about the door. We'll be sure to pay for damages once we collect what's owed to us. Samuel positioned himself between Maya and the intruders. The shotgun held ready, but not yet aimed. Gentlemen, you're trespassing on federal property. Leave now, and we'll forget this incident ever happened. Johnson laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Federal property, is it? That's interesting, considering we've got a letter here from the railroad company authorizing us to retrieve stolen property. He waved a folded paper that looked even less official than his previous fake warrant. Let me see that authorization, Samuel demanded. I don't think so. Johnson's expression turned ugly. See, we've decided that negotiating with you folks isn't getting us anywhere. Time for more direct action. Carl moved to flank them from the left, while two of the other men positioned themselves near the stove. Maya realized with growing terror that they'd planned this assault carefully, cutting off escape routes and surrounding their targets with military precision. "What do you want?" Maya asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "What we've always wanted, sweetheart. Payment for damages, pain and suffering, lost wages." Johnson's gaze roved over her pregnant form with obvious calculation. "Course, we're willing to discuss alternative forms of compensation." The implication in his words made Maya's skin crawl, but it also ignited something fierce and protective in her chest. "You'll get nothing from me, won't we?" Johnson signaled to his men, who began moving closer with predatory intent. "See, we figure a pregnant girl's got limited options. Can't run far, can't fight hard. Makes her real cooperative when properly motivated." Samuel's shotgun came up smoothly, the barrel centered on Johnson's chest. "One more step and I'll paint the depot walls with you." "Now, that would be unfortunate," Johnson said, apparently unconcerned by the weapon aimed at his heart. "Especially considering we've got friends outside watching the back door. You pull that trigger, and they'll come through that rear entrance like the devil himself. It would be a real shame if innocent folks got hurt in the crossfire." Maya felt despair settle over her like a shroud. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in the depot with no avenue of escape. But then she remembered her mother's jewelry box upstairs, the pearl earrings that had belonged to women who'd faced their own challenges with courage and dignity. "I have a proposal," she said suddenly. Johnson's eyebrows rose with mocking interest. "Do tell, you want money?" "Fine, but not here, not like this." Maya moved forward slightly, ignoring Samuel's sharp intake of breath. "There's a safe in the depot office. Railroad emergency funds, shipping receipts, enough cash to cover what you claim I owe you." "Maya, no," Samuel said urgently. "You don't." "Know what?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Maya interrupted, her eyes never leaving Johnson's face. "But I want guarantees. You take the money and leave town. No more threats, no more harassment. We settle this tonight, permanently." Johnson's smile was predatory and triumphant. "Now you're talking sense. Lead the way, sweetheart." As they moved toward the office at the rear of the depot, Maya caught Samuel's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward the telegraph key mounted on the wall near the safe. Samuel's expression shifted slightly, understanding flickering in his gaze. The office was cramped and cluttered, barely large enough for all 6 men and Maya's pregnant form. Johnson ordered 2 of his men to watch the main depot while he and Carl supervised the supposed transaction. "Safe's behind that filing cabinet," Maya said, pointing to a heavy wooden unit that would require 2 men to move. "Samuel has the combination." As Carl and another man struggled with the cabinet, Maya positioned herself near the telegraph key. Samuel moved to the safe, his fingers working the combination with deliberate slowness while Maya's hand crept toward the brass key. The moment the filing cabinet scraped clear of the safe, Maya's fingers found the telegraph and began tapping out an urgent message. "Depot under attack, send help immediately." The rapid clicking of the telegraph key was masked by the scraping of furniture and Johnson's impatient cursing, but Maya saw Samuel's slight nod of acknowledgement. Help was coming, if they could survive long enough for it to arrive. "Safe's open," Samuel announced, swinging the heavy door wide to reveal stacks of cash and important documents. Johnson's eyes lit with greed as he surveyed the contents. "That's more like it. Carl, start loading that into the saddlebags." As Carl bent to gather the money, Maya felt a sharp pain lance through her belly, so sudden and intense that she gasped aloud. The baby, responding to her stress and fear, had chosen this moment to remind her that nature followed its own schedule regardless of human conflicts. "What's wrong with her?" Johnson demanded, noting Maya's sudden pallor. "Nothing," Maya managed, though another contraction was already building. Just take your money and go." But even as she spoke, she felt warm liquid running down her legs, soaking through her dress and pooling on the office floor. Her water had broken, and the baby was coming whether Johnson and his men were finished with their business or not. Samuel's face went white with alarm. "Maya, we need to get you to Dr. Morrison right now." "Nobody's going anywhere until our business is concluded," Johnson snarled. But Maya could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. A woman in labor was not part of his carefully planned assault. Another contraction hit, stronger than the first, and Maya doubled over with a cry she couldn't suppress. Through the depot windows, she could see lights approaching across the snow-covered prairie, riders coming fast, their torches bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. "Someone's coming," Carl reported from the main depot. "Looks like half the county." Johnson cursed creatively and grabbed one of the money bags. "Time to go, boys. We got what we came for." But as they moved toward the rear exit, the depot's front door burst open again, this time admitting Sheriff Williams and 6 heavily armed deputies. The lawmen spread out with professional efficiency, cutting off the intruders' escape routes. "Drop your weapons," Williams commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You're surrounded and outgunned." Johnson spun toward the sheriff, his hand moving toward the pistol at his belt, but Samuel's shotgun blast shattered the air between them. The load of birdshot peppered the wall inches from Johnson's head, close enough to singe his hair and send him diving for cover behind the filing cabinet. "Next load's buckshot," Samuel announced calmly, working the shotgun's action, aimed at center mass. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya's labored breathing was clearly audible. Another contraction seized her, and she clung to Samuel's desk for support, her knuckles white with strain. "Samuel," she gasped, "I think the baby's coming now." Sheriff Williams took in the scene with practiced eyes, the pregnant woman in obvious labor, the railroad thugs caught red-handed with stolen money, the depot master protecting his employee with deadly determination. "Johnson, you and your boys are under arrest for armed robbery, assault, and threatening federal employees." Williams's voice was granite-hard with authority. "Drop your weapons and come out with your hands visible." One by one, Johnson's men surrendered, their bravado evaporating in the face of superior numbers and firepower. Only Johnson himself remained defiant, his eyes wild with desperation and thwarted greed. "This ain't over," he snarled as the deputy shackled his wrists. "That girl's still got debts to pay." "The only debt being paid tonight," Sheriff Williams replied, "is the one you owe to society. Federal judge is going to take a real dim view of your activities, Johnson. You'll be lucky to see daylight again before your hair turns gray." As the prisoners were led away into the snowy night, Maya felt another massive contraction seize her body. The baby was definitely coming, and there was no time to reach Dr. Morrison's office. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice tight with pain and fear. "I need help." Samuel was already moving, his crisis training from years of managing depot emergencies taking over. "Mrs. Peterson," he called to the woman who'd appeared in the doorway with several other concerned townspeople. "We need hot water, clean towels, and Dr. Morrison here as fast as possible." As the depot filled with helpful neighbors and Maya prepared to bring new life into the world, she realized that Johnson's threats had accomplished something he'd never intended. They'd forced Millbrook to choose sides, and the town had chosen her. She was no longer an outsider seeking sanctuary. She was home, surrounded by people who'd risked their own safety to protect her. And in a few hours her child would be born. Not as an unwanted burden, but as the newest member of a community that valued courage and loyalty above social conventions. The contractions were coming faster now, and Maya gripped Samuel's hand with desperate strength. Outside, snow continued to fall on a town that had proven itself worthy of the trust she'd placed in it. The pain consumed everything else. Thought, fear, even the memory of Johnson's threats faded beneath the primal urgency of birth. Maya gripped Samuel's hand with strength she didn't know she possessed, her world narrowing to the space between contractions and the encouraging voices surrounding her. Dr. Morrison had arrived within minutes of Mrs. Peterson's frantic summons, his medical bag clutched in one hand and his wife following close behind with an armload of clean linens. The depot office had been hastily converted into a makeshift delivery room, with quilts spread across Samuel's desk and every available lamp brought in to provide adequate light. "That's it, Maya," Dr. Morrison encouraged, his voice steady and professional despite the unconventional circumstances. "The baby's crowning. One more good push should do it." Maya bore down with every fiber of her being, her cry echoing through the depot and out into the snowy night where half of Millbrook waited anxiously for news. Samuel's hand was her anchor, his presence the only constant in a storm of sensation that threatened to sweep her away entirely. Then suddenly, miraculously, the pressure released and she heard it, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Tears streamed down Maya's face as Dr. Morrison lifted a tiny, perfect baby for her to see. "It's a girl," he announced with a smile that transformed his weathered features. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." Mrs. Morrison moved swiftly to clean and wrap the infant, while Dr. Morrison attended to the remaining medical necessities. Within moments, Maya found herself holding her daughter for the first time, a tiny bundle of warmth and possibility that made everything she'd endured worthwhile. The baby's eyes were dark and alert, already seeming to study her mother's face with an intensity that took Maya's breath away. Wisps of black hair crowned a head that was perfectly proportioned, and when Maya touched one miniature hand, tiny fingers closed around hers with surprising strength. "She's perfect," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at the child they'd helped bring safely into the world. "What will you name her?" Mrs. Morrison asked gently, cleaning up the medical supplies with practiced efficiency. Maya had considered many names during the long months of pregnancy, but looking into her daughter's face, only one seemed right. "Catherine," she said softly, glancing up at Samuel. "Catherine Elena Rodriguez." Samuel's sharp intake of breath told her he understood the significance. Catherine for the wife he'd lost, Elena for the mother who'd finally reached out with love instead of judgment. The baby would carry both legacies, bridging past and future in a way that honored what came before while embracing what was to come. "Katie would have been honored," Samuel said quietly, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. Little Catherine turned toward his touch, her tiny mouth working as if already seeking comfort from the man who'd protected her before birth. Dr. Morrison completed his examination of both mother and child, pronouncing them healthy and strong despite the dramatic circumstances of the delivery. "I'll want to see you both in a few days," he told Maya, "but everything looks excellent. Catherine's breathing is clear, her reflexes are good, and she's got the lung capacity of a future opera singer." As if to prove his point, the baby chose that moment to voice her displeasure at being unwrapped for examination, her cries bringing immediate responses from every adult in the room. Maya settled her daughter against her chest, marveling at how quickly the infant calmed when she felt her mother's heartbeat. Word of the successful birth spread through the crowd gathered outside faster than prairie fire. Soon the depot was filled with well-wishers bearing gifts. Mrs. Henderson brought a basket of eggs and fresh butter. The Methodist minister's wife contributed a stack of baby blankets she'd been knitting for the church charity drive. And even Bobby Martinez appeared, with a wooden rattle his grandfather had carved. "Town's buzzing about what happened here tonight," Sheriff Williams reported to Samuel when the immediate excitement had died down. "Way folks tell it, you two face down a gang of armed desperados to protect a helpless woman and her unborn child. Samuel raised an eyebrow at this dramatic interpretation. Maya was hardly helpless. She's the one who kept her head, got that telegraph message sent while Johnson was distracted by greed. Even better, Williams grinned. Nothing folks love more than a story where the underdog outsmarts the villains. By morning, this tale will be legend from here to Topeka. Maya listened to their conversation while nursing Catherine for the first time, amazed by how naturally the process came, despite her complete inexperience. The baby latched eagerly, her tiny hands kneading against Maya's chest with instinctive urgency. What happens to Johnson and his men? Maya asked, wanting to know if the threat was truly over. Federal prosecutors already been notified, Williams assured her. Armed robbery of a railroad facility carries serious prison time, especially when you add in the assault charges and threatening federal employees. Johnson's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum, and his associates won't fare much better. The relief that flooded through Maya was so intense it left her dizzy. For months she'd carried the constant fear of pursuit, the knowledge that violent men sought revenge for her defiance. Now finally she could truly rest, knowing her daughter would grow up free from the shadows of her mother's past. There's something else, Williams continued, his expression growing more serious. We found correspondence in Johnson's saddlebags suggesting this wasn't just about personal revenge. Seems he's been extorting money from other girls in similar situations, runaways, pregnant women, anyone vulnerable enough to pay rather than fight. Maya felt sick thinking about other women who'd faced Johnson's threats without Samuel's protection or Millbrook's support. Will they be safe now? We're working with federal marshals to track down his other victims, make sure they know he's no longer a threat. Williams's expression was grim with purpose. Your courage tonight didn't just save yourself and your baby. It probably saved dozens of other women from similar harassment. As the evening wore on and the visitors gradually departed, Maya found herself alone with Samuel and Catherine in the quiet depot. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the sounds of the departing townspeople and wrapping the building in peaceful silence. Samuel had prepared a makeshift nursery in Maya's room upstairs, using a wooden shipping crate lined with soft blankets as a temporary cradle. He'd also moved a comfortable chair from the depot's waiting area, positioning it near the window where Maya could rock the baby while watching the snow-covered prairie. I can't believe she's really here, Maya murmured, settling into the chair with Catherine in her arms. The baby had fallen asleep after nursing, her tiny face peaceful and content in the lamplight. Samuel knelt beside the chair, his expression tender as he watched the sleeping infant. She's beautiful, Maya, perfect in every way. Thank you, Maya said softly, for everything. For giving me a chance when no one else would, for protecting us tonight, for making me feel like I belonged somewhere. You don't need to thank me for treating you like family, Samuel replied, reaching out to adjust the blanket around Catherine's shoulders. That's what family does. Protects each other, stands together against whatever comes. The word, family, settled around them like a blessing, encompassing not just Maya and her newborn daughter, but the gentle man who'd become their anchor in an uncertain world. Looking at Samuel's face as he gazed at Catherine, Maya saw the same expression she'd observed in other new fathers: wonder, protectiveness, and unconditional love. Samuel, Maya said carefully, what happens now? I mean, with Catherine here, everything's different. I don't know how much help I'll be at the depot for a while. Samuel's smile was soft with understanding. Babies don't stay babies forever. You'll figure out how to balance motherhood and work just like women have been doing since the beginning of time. And in the meantime, well, Millbrook's full of ladies who'd be happy to help with childcare when you're ready to return to work. You really want me to stay, both of us, Maya? Samuel's voice was serious, weighted with emotion he'd been holding back for months. These past weeks, working beside you, watching you grow stronger and more confident, it's been the happiest I've been since Katie died. You've brought life back to this depot, made it feel like a home instead of just a workplace." He paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "I know I'm probably too old for you, and I know your situation is complicated, but I've come to care for you deeply. Not just as an employer or protector, but as a man cares for a woman he admires and loves." The confession hung between them like a bridge spanning uncertain waters. Maya felt her heart race with emotions she'd been afraid to examine too closely. The way Samuel's presence made her feel safe and valued, the comfort she found in his steady companionship, the growing attraction she'd tried to dismiss as mere gratitude. "You're not too old," she said quietly. "And my situation isn't complicated anymore. Johnson's gone, Catherine's here and healthy, and I finally know what I want my future to look like." "And what's that?" Maya shifted Catherine to one arm and reached out to take Samuel's hand with her free hand. "I want to raise my daughter in a place where she be loved and valued for who she is, not judged for the circumstances of her birth. I want to work beside someone who respects my abilities and treats me as an equal partner. And I want to build something lasting with a man who's already proven he'll stand by me through anything." Samuel's fingers tightened around hers, his eyes bright with hope and possibility. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you too, Samuel Harrison. Not out of gratitude or dependence, but because you're good and kind and decent, and because you make me want to be the best version of myself." The kiss that followed was gentle and reverent, mindful of the sleeping baby between them, but full of promise for the future they would build together. When they separated, both were smiling through tears of joy and relief. "So," Samuel said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "does this mean you'll marry me? Make this arrangement official in the eyes of God and the community?" Maya's answer was immediate and certain. "Yes, whenever you want, however you want. Catherine and I are yours if you'll have us." "Tomorrow wouldn't be soon enough," Samuel replied, then laughed at his own eagerness. "Though I suppose we should give you time to recover from tonight's excitement before we start planning another major life event." "A few weeks," Maya agreed, already imagining herself in a simple white dress, standing beside Samuel in Millbrook's small church while Catherine slept in Mrs. Peterson's arms. Just long enough for Catherine to grow big enough for her first public appearance as a wedding guest. The next morning brought sunshine that turned the snow-covered prairie into a field of diamonds, and with it came a steady stream of visitors bearing congratulations and gifts for the newest member of Millbrook's community. Mrs. Peterson arrived with a ham and a pot of soup, claiming that new mothers needed proper nutrition to maintain their strength. The Methodist minister's wife brought hand-sewn baby clothes in graduated sizes, practical gifts that spoke to Maya's uncertain financial situation without calling attention to it. Even Mrs. Thornton made an appearance, though her visit was stiff, with barely concealed disapproval. She examined Catherine with the air of a judge evaluating evidence, but even her stern expression softened slightly when the baby grasped her finger with tiny, determined hands. "She's healthy enough," Mrs. Thornton pronounced, as if this were a minor miracle given the circumstances of Catherine's conception. "Pretty child. Shame about the irregular situation, but children can't be blamed for their parents' mistakes." "Catherine isn't a mistake," Maya said firmly, her protective instincts flaring at the implied criticism. "She's a blessing, and she be raised to know her worth isn't determined by other people's narrow judgments." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose at Maya's direct challenge, but something in the younger woman's tone seemed to give her pause. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose time will tell what kind of woman she becomes. Upbringing matters more than breeding, generally speaking." It wasn't exactly a blessing, but coming from Adelaide Thornton, it represented significant progress. Maya accepted the grudging approval with grace, understanding that even conditional acceptance was better than Open hostility. Dr. Morrison's daily visits confirmed that both mother and baby were thriving. Catherine was gaining weight steadily. Her reflexes were excellent, and she showed every sign of robust health. Maya's recovery was proceeding normally, though the doctor cautioned her to take things slowly for the first few weeks. First babies can be taxing on a woman's system, he explained during his third-day examination. Your body needs time to heal properly before you return to regular activities. How long before I can work at the depot again? Maya asked, already missing the sense of purpose and accomplishment her job provided. Light duties after 2 weeks, full responsibilities after a month, Dr. Morrison replied. And that's assuming you have reliable help with childcare. Newborns need frequent feeding and attention. Samuel, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with a solution already prepared. Mrs. Peterson's offered to watch Catherine during depot hours. Says she misses having little ones around and would welcome the chance to spoil a baby again. The offer of help should have been reassuring, but Maya felt an unexpected pang of anxiety at the thought of leaving Catherine with someone else. The baby had been in her arms for only 3 days, but already the bond between them felt unbreakable. It's natural to feel nervous about separation, Dr. Morrison assured her, noting her expression. All new mothers experience that protective instinct. But Catherine will benefit from interacting with other caring adults, and you'll find it easier to focus on work when you know she's safe and well cared for. As the week progressed, Maya gradually adjusted to the rhythms of motherhood, the frequent feedings, the unpredictable sleep schedule, the constant awareness of another person's needs taking precedence over her own. But far from feeling burdened by these responsibilities, she found joy in Catherine's complete dependence on her. Satisfaction in being needed so absolutely. Samuel proved to be a natural with the baby, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he changed diapers and rocked Catherine to sleep when Maya needed rest. He seemed to have an instinctive understanding of what the infant needed, whether it was a warm blanket, a different position, or simply the comfort of being held. You're going to be a wonderful father, Maya told him one evening as they sat together in the depot's main room, Catherine sleeping peacefully in Samuel's arms, while Maya caught up on the bookkeeping she'd missed during the birth. I hope so, Samuel replied, his voice soft with wonder as he watched the baby's face. I never thought I'd have this chance to help raise a child, to be part of a real family again. Catherine's lucky to have you, we both are. Samuel looked up from the sleeping baby to meet Maya's eyes. I'm the lucky one. 6 months ago, I was just going through the motions, existing from day to day without any real purpose beyond keeping the trains running on schedule. Now I have reasons to look forward to tomorrow, plans for the future that go beyond railroad timetables. The future they discussed included more than just their immediate family. Samuel had been corresponding with railroad officials about expanding Millbrook's depot services, potentially adding a freight storage facility that would bring more business to the town. Maya's organizational skills and customer relations experience would be valuable assets in such an expansion. The regional superintendent is impressed by our efficiency reports, Samuel explained, showing Maya the official correspondence. Passenger satisfaction scores have improved dramatically since you started working here, and our shipping accuracy is the best in the district. Maya felt pride swell in her chest as she read the commendatory letter. Her work mattered, her contributions were recognized and valued. She wasn't just someone who'd been given charity employment. She was a skilled professional whose abilities had made a measurable difference. What would the expansion involve? She asked, already thinking through the logistics. Additional storage buildings, expanded loading facilities, possibly even a small hotel for traveling salesmen and passengers caught between connections. Samuel's enthusiasm was infectious as he outlined the possibilities. It would mean more responsibility for both of us, longer hours during busy seasons, but also better pay and the chance to really build something significant. Maya imagined Catherine growing up around such a bustling enterprise, learning from childhood that honest work was valuable and that women could be partners in business as well as in marriage. It was a future worth building toward, a legacy worth creating. The conversation was interrupted by Catherine's waking cry, demanding attention with the imperious tone of someone accustomed to immediate service. Maya lifted her daughter from Samuel's arms, marveling again at the tiny perfection of fingers and toes, the alert intelligence and dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "She's going to be strong-willed," Samuel observed with amusement as Catherine voiced her displeasure at being disturbed. "Good," Maya replied firmly. "Strong-willed women make their own paths in the world instead of waiting for others to decide their fate." As she settled Catherine at her breast for another feeding, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate runaway with no prospects beyond survival. Now she was a mother, a valued employee, and soon to be the wife of a man who loved her unconditionally. The transformation wasn't just in her circumstances, it was in her understanding of her own worth. Johnson's threats had forced her to choose between fear and courage, and she'd discovered reserves of strength she'd never known she possessed. Mrs. Thornton's disapproval had taught her that other people's judgments couldn't diminish her value unless she allowed them to. And Samuel's love had shown her that she deserved to be cherished for who she was, not tolerated despite her flaws. "I want to write to my mother," Maya said suddenly, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Tell her about Catherine, about our engagement, about how things turned out." Samuel nodded approvingly. "She want to know she has a granddaughter. And maybe, in time, she want to visit, to be part of Catherine's life." The possibility of reconciliation with her mother felt less urgent now that Maya had built her own family, but it remained important. Catherine deserved to know her heritage, to understand the generations of strong women who'd contributed to her existence. And Alina Rodriguez deserved the chance to redeem herself as a grandmother, if she couldn't reclaim her role as a supportive mother. 2 weeks after Catherine's birth, Maya returned to light duties at the depot, bringing the baby with her in a basket that Samuel positioned within easy reach of the ticket window. The arrangement proved surprisingly practical. Catherine slept peacefully through most of the morning activity, and passengers were delighted by glimpses of Millbrook's newest resident. "She's beautiful," cooed Mrs. Henderson, purchasing a ticket for the afternoon train to Topeka. "Look at those tiny fingers. And so alert for such a young baby." Maya beamed with maternal pride, grateful for the community's acceptance of her unconventional situation. Catherine wasn't hidden away like a shameful secret. She was welcomed as a new member of Millbrook's extended family, her presence adding warmth and life to the depot's daily operations. The wedding was planned for the first Sunday in February, giving Maya time to recover fully from childbirth and allowing Catherine to grow sturdy enough for her role as an honored guest. Mrs. Peterson threw herself into the preparations, with enthusiasm that suggested she'd been waiting years for such an opportunity. "Nothing elaborate," Maya insisted when the older woman began discussing flowers and decorations. "Just a simple ceremony with the people who matter most." But simple, in Mrs. Peterson's vocabulary, still involved considerable planning. The church ladies organized a reception in the fellowship hall, complete with cake and sandwiches for the entire congregation. The Methodist minister's wife donated the use of her own wedding dress, carefully altered to accommodate Maya's post-pregnancy figure. Even Mrs. Thornton contributed a grudging wedding gift, a set of embroidered pillowcases that must have taken weeks to complete. As the wedding day approached, Maya found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation she'd never expected to feel about marriage. Her relationship with Samuel wasn't based on desperate need or social expectation, but on genuine love and mutual respect. They were partners already in work and in raising Catherine, The wedding would simply make official what their hearts had already acknowledged. The night before the ceremony, Maya sat by her window with Catherine in her arms, looking out at the snow-covered town that had become home. In the distance, she could see lights glowing in houses throughout Millbrook, families gathered around dinner tables, children being tucked into bed, the ordinary miracles of domestic life that she would soon share officially. Catherine stirred in her sleep, her tiny hands flexing as if reaching for something only she could see. Maya wondered what dreams visited such a young mind, what possibilities her daughter might envision for her own future. Whatever path Catherine chose, she would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, valued for her own unique gifts, and supported by a community that believed in second chances. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter. But tonight Maya was content to hold her daughter close and count the blessings that had grown from the ashes of her former life. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She'd discovered that family wasn't defined by blood or law, but by the choice to love and support each other through whatever challenges life brought. Most importantly, she'd found that a woman's worth wasn't determined by the circumstances of her birth or the mistakes of her youth, but by the strength of her character and the love in her heart. Catherine would grow up understanding these truths, prepared to face whatever future awaited with confidence and grace. The depot clock chimed midnight, marking the arrival of Maya's wedding day. In a few hours she would become Mrs. Samuel Harrison, officially joining her life to the man who'd given her sanctuary when she needed it most, and love when she'd thought herself unworthy of it. Outside, snow continued to fall on a sleeping town that had taught one desperate young woman the true meaning of home. And in her arms, Catherine Elena Rodriguez slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams visit the children of those brave enough to build new lives from broken pieces. February 3rd, 1895 dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the church windows and casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Maya stood before the mirror in the church vestry, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was the frightened, desperate girl who had tumbled from a freight train 5 months ago. In her place stood a confident bride, radiant in borrowed white silk and her grandmother's pearl earrings. Mrs. Peterson fussed with the dresses train while Mrs. Morrison carefully arranged Maya's veil. The entire female population of Millbrook seemed to have squeezed into the small room, each offering advice, compliments, or gentle corrections to Maya's appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful, dear," Mrs. Peterson declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Samuel's going to weep when he sees you walking down that aisle." Catherine, now 3 weeks old and miraculously sleeping through the commotion, lay in a basket lined with white satin. She would be carried down the aisle by Dr. Morrison's wife, serving as both flower girl and living testament to the unconventional. "Family about to be officially formed. Are you nervous?" asked Sarah Williams, the sheriff's young wife, as she pinned a small cluster of winter roses to Maya's dress. Maya considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what feels right." The church bell began to toll, calling the congregation to witness Millbrook's most talked-about wedding in decades. Through the vestry window, Maya could see carriages and wagons still arriving, bringing families from neighboring farms who wouldn't miss such an event. "It's time," Mrs. Peterson announced, giving Maya one final hug. "Remember to walk slowly. Smile at the congregation, and don't lock your knees or you'll faint." The church doors opened to reveal a sanctuary packed beyond capacity. Every pew was filled, with standees lining the walls and children perched on their fathers' shoulders for better views. The collective intake of breath when Maya appeared was audible, followed by murmurs of approval that warmed her heart. But Maya had eyes only for Samuel, who stood at the altar in his best suit, his face transformed by joy and wonder. Beside him stood Tom Williams as best man, and Dr. Morrison holding the ring that would soon grace Maya's finger. As she walked toward them, Catherine sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Morrison's arms, Maya felt the last remnants of her past fears dissolve. Ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows and blessings, familiar words taking on new meaning when spoken with absolute conviction. When Samuel slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Maya felt something settle into place deep in her soul, a sense of belonging that she'd never dared hope to experience. "You may kiss the bride," announced Reverend Matthews with unusual enthusiasm. Samuel's kiss was tender and reverent, mindful of their audience but full of promise for the private moments to come. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, accompanied by cheers from the younger men and happy tears from most of the women. The reception in the church fellowship hall exceeded even Mrs. Peterson's ambitious plans. Tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes contributed by every family in attendance, and someone had somehow procured enough coffee to keep the entire gathering caffeinated through the afternoon. A small orchestra comprised of the blacksmith on fiddle, the bank clerk on piano, and Bobby Martinez's father on harmonica provided lively dance music that had couples of all ages spinning around the cleared space. Maya found herself passed from congratulatory embrace to congratulatory embrace, receiving blessings, advice, and promises of continued support from people who had become genuine friends. Even Adelaide Thornton offered stiff but sincere best wishes, remarking that Maya had made the best of a difficult situation with admirable grace. "Speech, speech," called out Jeremiah Henderson, raising his cup of coffee in a toast. Samuel, never comfortable with public speaking, nevertheless rose to address the gathered crowd. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "Maya and I want to thank you all for welcoming our family into your hearts. 6 months ago, I was a lonely widower going through the motions of life. Today, I'm the luckiest man in Kansas, blessed with a beautiful wife and daughter who've reminded me what it means to live with purpose and joy." He paused, looking down at Maya with such love that several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "This community has shown us the true meaning of Christian charity, not just helping those in need, but embracing them. As family, Catherine will grow up knowing she belongs here, that she's valued and loved for exactly who she is. That's a gift we can never repay, but we'll spend our lives trying to pass it forward to others who need it." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but it was the expressions on people's faces that moved Maya most deeply. These weren't the polite smiles of social obligation, but the genuine joy of a community celebrating one of its own. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration gradually wound down, Maya and Samuel found themselves sitting together at the head table, Catherine contentedly nursing beneath a discreetly arranged shawl. The easy domesticity of the moment, surrounded by the debris of their wedding feast, felt more romantic than any grand gesture. "No regrets?" Samuel asked quietly, his hand covering hers on the table. "Only one," Maya replied, then smiled at his concerned expression. "I regret that it took so much pain and fear to bring me to this moment. But maybe that's how the best things happen, through struggle, through the courage to keep moving forward even when the path isn't clear." The next several months established the rhythm of their married life. Maya returned to full duties at the depot once Catherine was old enough for Mrs. Peterson's enthusiastic childcare, and the three of them settled into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. Samuel proved to be a devoted stepfather, though he never presumed to replace Catherine's biological father in name. He was simply the man who loved her unconditionally and would raise her as his own. The depot expansion Samuel had discussed became reality in early summer, bringing new prosperity to Millbrook and additional responsibilities for both Harrison family members. Maya's organizational skills proved invaluable in managing the increased freight traffic, while her natural empathy made her the preferred contact for passengers dealing with travel complications. "Mrs. Harrison," called out a familiar voice one blazing July afternoon. Maya looked up from her scheduling ledgers to see a well-dressed woman approaching the ticket window, a woman whose face, though older and more careworn, was unmistakably familiar. "Mother," Maya breathed, her heart racing with emotions she'd thought long buried. Elena Rodriguez stood uncertainly in the depot doorway, her traveling dress dusty from the journey and her eyes fixed on her daughter with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She'd aged noticeably in the months since Maya's departure, gray threads now visible in her dark hair and new lines etched around her eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding," Elena said formally. "I received your letter about the wedding and the baby, and I wanted to meet my granddaughter." The conversation that followed was careful and stilted at first, both women feeling their way through a relationship that had been damaged almost beyond repair. But when Catherine woke from her nap and was placed in her grandmother's arms for the first time, the last barriers between them began to crumble. "She's beautiful," Alana whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she studied Catherine's tiny features. "She has your father's eyes, Maya, and look at those hands. She's going to be an artist like her grandmother." The visit lasted 3 days, during which Elena gradually relaxed into the rhythm of the Harrison household. She helped with cooking and cleaning, shared stories of Maya's childhood that Samuel received with delighted interest, and spent long hours rocking Catherine while humming Spanish lullabies. On the final evening, as they sat on the depot's front porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson, Elena finally addressed the gulf that had separated them. "I failed you," she said simply. "When you needed your mother most, I chose my own security over your safety. I've lived with that shame every day since you left." Maya was quiet for a long moment, watching Catherine sleep peacefully in Samuel's arms while the evening breeze stirred the curtains through the open window behind them. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted. "Hurt that you didn't believe me, that you chose Robert over your own daughter. But I've learned that carrying anger just poisons your own happiness. I forgave you months ago, Mother. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." Elena's sob was audible in the gathering dusk. "I don't deserve such grace from you." "None of us deserve grace," Maya replied, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. "That's what makes it grace. Catherine will grow up knowing her grandmother. If you want to be part of her life." The reconciliation wasn't instant or complete. Too much damage had been done for that, but it was a beginning. Elena returned to her own life with promises to visit regularly and letters that arrived weekly, filled with news from home and gentle inquiries about Catherine's development. Years passed with the steady contentment of a life well lived. Catherine grew from a placid baby into a spirited toddler who charmed everyone she met with her infectious laughter and fearless curiosity. She took her first steps in the depot office, said her first word to Samuel, it was Papa, to Maya's pretended dismay, and established herself as Millbrook's unofficial mascot. The railroad expansion Samuel had championed brought prosperity to the entire region. Millbrook evolved from a sleepy farm town into a bustling transportation hub, complete with a proper hotel, expanded commercial district, and plans for a new schoolhouse that would serve children from 3 counties. Maya's role in this transformation was significant and widely recognized. The regional railroad supervisors frequently sought her input on customer service improvements, and she was invited to speak at conferences about depot management in rural communities. She discovered she had a talent for public speaking and a gift for inspiring other women to pursue opportunities in business. "You've come a long way from the frightened girl who jumped from a freight train," Samuel observed one evening as they reviewed the month's financial reports together. Catherine, now 3 years old, was building elaborate structures with wooden blocks on the office floor, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Sometimes I feel like that was someone else's life," Maya replied, calculating the final shipping totals. "Like I'm remembering a story I heard rather than something I lived through." The courage was always there, Samuel said. The circumstances just gave you reasons to use it. Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's delighted shriek as her block tower collapsed in a satisfying crash. She immediately began rebuilding, her persistence and optimism reminding Maya daily of the resilience children possessed when they grew up feeling secure and loved. Maya often reflected on the choices that had brought her to this point: the desperate decision to jump from Johnson's train, the courage to knock on the depot door that snowy night, the determination to build a life rather than simply survive. Each choice had led to this moment, this life, this family that felt both miraculous and inevitable. The depot had become more than just her workplace. It was the symbol of her transformation. The same building where she'd once begged for sanctuary now served as the headquarters for her own small business empire. She'd recently been approached about managing depot operations in 2 neighboring towns, an opportunity that would establish her as one of the most successful businesswomen in the region. On Catherine's 4th birthday, as Maya watched her daughter blow out candles on a cake surrounded by the faces of people who loved her, she made a silent promise. Catherine would grow up knowing she could be anything she wanted to be, that her worth wasn't determined by other people's expectations or limitations. She would understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Make a wish, sweetheart, Maya encouraged, helping Catherine lean closer to the flickering candles. Catherine closed her eyes tightly, her small face scrunched in concentration as she made her secret wish. Then she took a deep breath and blew out all 4 candles in one triumphant puff, to enthusiastic applause from the gathered party guests. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and Catherine had been tucked into bed with stories and songs, Maya and Samuel sat together on their front porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The depot was quiet now, the last train having departed hours ago, but tomorrow would bring new passengers, new freight, new opportunities to serve their growing community. Any regrets? Samuel asked, echoing the question he'd posed on their wedding day. Maya considered the question seriously, as she always did. Her life had taken turns she never could have predicted, led her through experiences both terrible and wonderful, ultimately bringing her to this moment of perfect contentment. None, she said finally, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the first star appear in the western sky. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of fear or courage, it all led here, to this life, to this family. I wouldn't change a single thing. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs but somehow blessing both. And in the quiet depot where a desperate girl had once sought sanctuary, the Harrison family settled into another peaceful night, secure in the knowledge that love and courage could transform even the most broken beginnings into something beautiful. The story that had begun with a frightened teenager jumping from a moving train had evolved into something Maya's younger self never could have imagined, a testament to the power of second chances, the importance of community, and the truth that sometimes the most beautiful lives grow from the most unlikely soil. Catherine Elena Harrison would grow up hearing this story, learning from it the lessons that would guide her own journey, that courage comes in many forms, that family is built through choice as much as blood, and that every person deserves the chance to write their own ending, no matter how their story begins. And someday, when Catherine faced her own crossroads and difficult choices, she would remember the mother who jumped from a train rather than accept defeat, the stepfather who chose love over convention, and the community that proved home isn't where you're born, but where you're brave enough to build a life worth living. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.